are live and well here on that speaker system. Sounds good, Johnny boy. Well, thanks for your attendance this morning for our Bible timeline study. We have come to a major point in biblical history with the end of the southern and northern kingdoms of Israel and the Babylonian captivity beginning with the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar. Last week when we concluded our study, we were talking about the Ark of the Covenant and what happened to it. And I don't want to spend a lot of time belaboring issues that don't matter to our salvation, okay? For all practical purposes, the Ark of the Covenant does not have anything to do specifically with us going to heaven or to hell. However, we are students of the Scriptures, and I think this timeline study is helping us understand the book and understand things that will help us be smarter about stuff and be able to give an answer to those who ask us a question. That's also instruction in the book, to always be ready to give an answer. So I did just a little bit of looking and thinking, more thinking than looking, which is pretty dangerous for me, about the Ark of the Covenant. One of the first things that came to mind was this. What's the first mention of any kind of ark in the Bible? Noah, chapter 6, Genesis. Michael even raised his eyebrows back when we were looking at some stuff when I mentioned that the word covenant is used 9 times in Genesis chapter 6. That's a lot. And we're talking about God's covenant with Noah and his promise. What was in the ark? What was in the ark that Noah got in? Animals, and the only, 8 people left on the globe. So we see this ark and this covenant once again being symbolic with the salvation of, at that point, the whole earth. It was God's symbol of protection for Noah and for all of the animals that were in the ark. So we see this ark and this concept of covenant mentioned 9 times as being a symbol of God's protection for his people. So when we come to Moses' Ark of the Covenant, we got the same sort of thing. What was in the Ark of the Covenant? Okay, the tables or copies of the law, Aaron's rod that had budded, and some manna and those sorts of things. So what do those things symbolically represent to the people of Israel? Salvation. God's concern over the people, God's presence with the people. We see the law is in there. We see the remembrance of their coming out of the land of Egypt with Aaron's rod. We see the manna, his sustenance of his people. So we see God's protecting hand among the Israelites. We see his presence among those people. Well, by the time we get to the divided kingdoms, Judah and Israel, God told them, even with Hosea, one of the first prophets to come to the northern kingdom, y'all aren't my people anymore. I'm giving hope to other people. He's sending Jonah to Nineveh at the same time Hosea is saying this, 750 BC. So we see God's presence starting to wane from the children of Israel, even in Judah. We see this idea of the physical, these physical things versus spiritual things. You know, Micah and even Hosea and Amos, all those guys said, I hate these festivals. Your music and psalms coming up to me is noise. I don't want all of this stuff. I need your heart. He had already started this whole concept of going from the physical things to the spiritual things. You know, doesn't matter how many oxen and rams they slaughtered and how many rivers of oil that they poured out. God did not want that. He wanted their hearts to be right. So, I was trying to find the Ark of the Covenant, and I couldn't remember anything after David got it back from the Philistines. But oddly enough, if you go to 2 Chronicles 35, when we've got good King Josiah, the last decent man on the throne. 2 Chronicles 35, verse 3, I was surprised to read, he also said to the Levites, okay, good first move there, who taught all Israel and who were holy to the Lord, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon and the son of David, king of Israel, built, and it will be a burden on your shoulders no longer. Looks like the Ark of the Covenant is in the temple in, what, 610, 605? I mean, before the Battle of Megiddo when Josiah was killed. So the Ark is in the temple in Jerusalem right before Nebuchadnezzar comes, according to 2 Chronicles 35. Now then, made mention of the book of Maccabees that supposedly Jeremiah may have taken the ark in the temple and hid it in the mountain where God overlooked. We saw Ezekiel 11:22 saying that the cherubims rose up and the Spirit of God was over the city. I don't know. I know this. Hebrews tells us that the things of the tabernacle and the old law were a shadow of things in heaven. Okay? They're a shadow of things that were in heaven, just an image of the things that were up there. Wow. Look in Revelation chapter 11, verse 19. Revelation chapter 11, verse 19. And the temple of God which is in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant appeared in his temple. There were flashes of lightning, sounds of pearls, thunder, earthquake, la la la. Now then, it's very likely that John, looking into heaven, seeing the ark of the covenant, was a symbolic. Chapter 11 of Revelation is the seventh trumpet and the end of all things, okay? So as he's looking into heaven, God's presence, God's love, God's hope for us and all mankind. So it's very possible this is a symbolic witnessing of the Ark of the Covenant. So, God is always there. He is always giving us hope. If we reach out to Him, He will reach out to us and give us the salvation that He has promised. However, if we turn away from Him, we will reap our due reward, as did the Assyrians, as did the people of Israel, as did the people of Judah, as did Babylon. So, thoughts for Ark of the Covenant. Just thought I'd toss those things out there. Okay, give you some things to go home this afternoon, get your book out, and start to look and see whether the things I'm saying are so. You need to be like the Bereans, okay? Yes, ma'am. Pardon? Well, I may have, yeah, I'm doing this off the top of my head. That's why you better go back and check me. It may very well be, yeah, starting chapter 9 and start counting them. So if there's one in chapter 6, that makes even 10 times that it's mentioned with Noah. So we're actually helping my case here today, okay? Covenant with Noah, an agreement with Noah. Okay, speaking of due rewards, Jacob had a brother, and his name was Esau. And Esau, when he was born, apparently in Genesis 25:25, was kind of a red-colored fellow. He was a bit rosy, I guess, and therefore the word in Hebrew for red is Edom. Okay? So the Edomites are descendants of Esau. Now, the Edomites were in the land of Canaan. Deuteronomy 2:22 says that God was going to give that portion of the land of Canaan to the descendants of Esau. And Deuteronomy 2:5 says, do not contend with them. I will not give you any of their land. No, not so much as for the sole of your foot to tread on, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau. So Edom in that area is referred to a lot as Mount Seir. They were up on a mountainous range is where they lived. It gave them lots of protection and lots of false comfort because they were up on a mountaintop. Okay? When Joshua and those guys came in, the king of Edom sent out an army, wouldn't let them come through their country. They had to turn and go around and cross the Jordan and go in through Jericho, which was probably a good thing, all things considering Rahab and Boaz and Ruth and all of those folks that came from that situation. But the Edomites were not friendly even at that time with the Israelites. The Lord had given them that country. Now, around 1000 BC, King David came in and put the hammer on them pretty good. He took over the whole country, and they were under the control of Israel. That's in 2 Samuel chapter 8. Which brings us to the prophet Obadiah. This is the next book in our historic timeline. Obadiah foretells the punishment of Edom. It's the shortest book in the Old Testament, I think maybe 19, 20 verses, something like that, one chapter. He foretells the fall of the Edomites. Now, the date of Obadiah and what he's talking about is up for debate, okay? There were two times, basically, in biblical history when the Edomites could have done the things that Obadiah is berating them about. During the reign of King Jehoram of Judah in 2 Kings 8, and also in 2 Chronicles 21, Jerusalem was invaded by the Philistines and the Arabs, and the Edomites came over and kind of plundered and pillaged just a little bit. This would put Obadiah around the time of Elijah, up in that 900 to 850 range. Most people, however, give a later date of a 6th century date, about the time where we are now, because this is when Nebuchadnezzar came in, carried off the people into Babylonian captivity, and the Edomites did in fact come in and occupy Jerusalem. Took a bunch of the stuff, tried to live there, and this is a time when consensus is around 586, with the last invasion of Nebuchadnezzar that the book of Obadiah is referring to. Obadiah chapter 1 says, the Lord will punish Edom for attacking Judah after the fall of, that's my writing. You did violence to your relatives, the Israelites, so you will be covered with shame and destroyed forever. You stood aside without helping while strangers carried Israel's treasures away. Okay, stuff out of the temple. when foreigners entered Israel's city gates and threw lots to decide what part of Jerusalem they would take, you were like one of them. So it really kind of sounds like that Obadiah is talking about the time when Nebuchadnezzar came in and took the stuff out of the city. Obadiah's prophecy came true pretty quickly, only about 20 years after they took over Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar comes in, takes out Edom, and the fall of that nation is also completed. So Obadiah is probably written about that time. I think I've got that I got a new chart working that will come out, and it was going to show him about that time. He prophesied that the people from the Negev, that's a word that we see in the scriptures a lot, the Negev. It's a desertous region to the south, and a lot of times it's just kind of used as a symbol of, instead of saying the south, they'll say from the Negev. That just means it's coming from the desert to the south. Those people did occupy that part of the country. As far as the end of talking about the Edomites, the Herods were from the Edomite nationality. In the New Testament, it will be referred to as the name Idumea. We see that in the scriptures a lot. Idumaea. Idumea. That area was governed by Herod's brother, and it was finally absorbed into the Roman Empire about 100 BC. We'll talk about that, Lord willing, when we get to that date. Okay, so the Edomites are now gone, Israel is gone, Judah is gone, Babylonia has taken over the whole country down there. With the rise of Babylonia, we see God's plan unfolding in all of the prophecies of all of these prophets, starting back from Amos, saying it's going to be taken away, you're not God's people anymore, new regime is coming in. We see this all coming to fruition. You know, originally God had given all of this area to the Israelites, the promised land. Come in, take over, get rid of all of these people. They didn't do it. And it caused them trouble all the way to Solomon, all the way down through all of these northern and southern kingdoms with the intermarrying and the worshiping of these false gods. Well, now, through God's hand, it's finally all under his control once again, okay? Even though it's through the Babylonians, this whole area has been finally taken over, and it's under the control of God. So, all of these areas have reaped their due rewards under one control of one nation. And who does God have in place for the unfolding of the future? An absolute outstanding major character in the Bible, and that is the gentleman Daniel. Daniel was taken into captivity with the first run into Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar in 605. God used Daniel to prove to the captives that he was still alive and in control, because Daniel was on the scene and he was taking care of business, and everybody in all of Babylonia knew about Daniel. We'll talk some more about that and his power, and that God's hand was on him. He proved that to us that through prophecy God is real. Daniel prophesies about the unfolding of all of the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. He gives us a whole history of everything that's going to unfold to us all the way down to the time of Christ. Daniel tells us all about it, okay? So, few characters have the kind of status that Daniel does. Now, Amy and I were talking the other morning over breakfast. I said, you know, it's odd when you see these things in the scriptures that mirror images and things that you just look at and your mouth just kind of hangs open. Daniel, young man, taken from his homeland, put into captivity into a foreign country, rose to power because of interpreting dreams through the power of God. Does that sound familiar? What about Joseph? Same exact deal. How much negative stuff, with the exception of him kind of being a little bit of a braggart as a kid and the dreams and his brothers and everything, you don't ever hear anything bad about Joseph. Everything he did was good. Daniel, you're not going to find any dirt on Daniel anywhere in the book. I've got a list of 12 biblical facts here we're going to go over. I'll go ahead and break into one of them. When they started trying to find bad stuff on Daniel, the only thing they could come up with was to make it illegal to worship God. Okay? Which later got him into trouble. But they couldn't find anything that they could get on Daniel other than we just got to make a new law that he can't worship God. So, because they knew he was going to do it. So anyway, lion's den. But here's some points about Daniel. Daniel is from David's royal family, okay? He is, for hundreds of years, a descendant of David had been on that throne. When the dynasty is in its twilight years here in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar comes in, carries off the treasures from the temple, carries off a bunch of stuff. What he mainly carries away are pretty girls and good-looking smart guys. Okay? Well, we can look right there in Daniel chapter 1, verse 3, verse 6, and he's one of the ones that goes. So Daniel's a smart, good-looking guy. We know that already because that's criteria for being there. Now, why Nebuchadnezzar does this, maybe they're kind of royal hostages. If he's got these people in Babylon, maybe the leaders and rulers wouldn't be so bad about trying to, well, anyway, they got their kids in there for hostage. Maybe he just kind of wants to show off all these good-looking people he brought in from Israel. Who knows what his reason is. But he made an excellent choice when he picked Daniel, okay? That was a good choice. Okay, not just any guy got to go to Babylon, only the handsome ones. That was the criteria. Daniel made the grade, Daniel 1 and 4. He is renowned for his wisdom and intelligence. All the captives, when they get there, have to go through a 3-year course in Babylonian language and literature and all of this stuff. But Daniel and his friends, in Daniel chapter 1, verse 20, are found to be 10 times wiser than all the experienced magicians and all of these enchanters and all these people that were working under Nebuchadnezzar, okay? Smarter and wiser. And this wisdom makes him pretty much a legend in his own time. Even when Nebuchadnezzar's son has this horrible dream that they can't figure out, the mother comes and says, no, you got a guy here, right here in the kingdom. Daniel 5 and 11. He can tell you all about this dream. He knows about that kind of stuff. So even the prophet Ezekiel, who is one of his contemporaries we'll talk about next, Ezekiel even mentions Daniel. When he's talking about one of these arrogant rulers, he says, behold, you're wiser than Daniel. There's no secret that's a match for you. He's really just kind of making fun of him. However, I do find that it's kind of cool that when he is bringing up someone to this guy who says you're wiser than Daniel, he picked Daniel. He didn't pick somebody like, let's say, Solomon. He don't pick Solomon. He picks Daniel to say. Okay, so Daniel's specialty here is kind of dream interpretation. There are several dreams in the Bible. Many of them are straightforward instructions from God, but other dreams are kind of bizarre and symbolism to communicate different things. When somebody gets a dream in the Bible, there's about 3 ways to cover this thing. They can figure it out themselves. They can get someone else to tell them what it is. Or they can get someone from the dream itself to tell them what happened. Well, Daniel goes for interpreting this himself. Now, we will read some more in Daniel that he has a little bit of trouble interpreting some of the dreams he had himself. He was confused. Didn't understand. So he chose one of the others. He asked someone from the dream to explain it. He asked Gabriel to tell me what this is, and Gabriel tells him what the dream was about. So we have information coming from inside this dream. Daniel's righteousness is legendary. He's characterized by his unwavering faithfulness to the law of Moses. When they first got there as kids, and they're going to feed them all of this food that they're not supposed to eat as Israelites, Daniel says, no, we don't want to eat that. We don't want to eat that. He and his buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they just want to eat vegetables. And the guy says, no, man, y'all going to get poorly, and the king's not going to like that. And what happened? Well, same thing that happened to us if we all went vegetarian. We'd get a lot healthier, wouldn't we? And so anyway, we see this coming to fruition. Ezekiel again mentions Daniel. He uses Daniel, Noah, and Job as examples of extremely righteous men. This story is in Ezekiel 14. He tells them even if Noah, Daniel, and Job, just like before when they said if Moses and Samuel would ask to save these people, Ezekiel is telling them now if Noah and Daniel and Job prayed for these people, it's not going to do any good, because the deal is pretty much signed here, okay? As we said earlier, there's really no dirt to be found on Daniel, even with all of the major faithful men described in Hebrews 11. You can find some trouble. Abraham, Hagar, maybe telling a little tale about the wife and being the sister and all of that. And, wow, Moses, he killed a guy, struck the rock, couldn't go into, we got a little negative stuff even on a mighty man like Moses. David, bless his heart, a man after God's own heart. He's just like us. He was a sinner. But as I stated earlier, only thing they could find on Daniel was to make it illegal to worship. So they knew that was the only thing they could say negative about this guy. So we really don't have anything negative to say about Daniel. He was the overseer of the pagan magicians in Babylon. His status of being able to interpret these dreams and stuff was so impressive that, all right, we're just going to make you in charge of all the magicians. That's a pretty crazy spot to be, huh? I wonder how he liked that job. Being in charge of all these guys who were making up crazy kind of stuff. As far as these magicians are concerned, Daniel, he is the man. When they have these dreams, when Nebuchadnezzar has that dream and he says, I need somebody to come in here and interpret it, and they said, well, what was a dream? And he said, well, I don't really know. I can't tell you. I don't remember it. I'm not going to tell you about it. Not only do you have to remember, you got to tell me what the dream was and then tell me what it means. Yeah, okay, let's see. How are we going to figure that out? Well, Daniel does. He interprets the dream. What did these magicians say? Nobody can do that. Only person that can do that is someone who is touched by God, who God's talking to. And nobody has that. No, God's not here with us. Well, it was kind of bizarre that the Babylonians built a big temple to the gods that they could come down so they could live among the humans. Well, they just said that no one can do that. Why didn't they go to their temple where their gods came down and could be with people? False gods. So we see Daniel interpreting the dream. So they start saying about Daniel, the spirit of the holy God lives in him. That's in Daniel 4, Daniel 18, 15, 14. I mean, he's getting a reputation. They know that God is with Daniel and that This is not any kind of make-believe thing. He's done it too many times. His resume is stacking up like nobody's business with Daniel. God uses Daniel just like he used Elijah to prove to these people that Baal and all of these Baal gods of Babylon, they can't stand up. They can't stand up to the true and holy God. I find it also odd that they say that the gods have to live with someone to be able to dream like that. They built a temple to bring their gods in so they could live with them, but their gods couldn't do it. But the temple of God in Jerusalem, they destroyed. Yeah. So, temple destroyed by the Babylonians, but God is not living in that temple with that Ark of the Covenant anymore. He's in the hearts and minds of these people. His laws are being written in their hearts just like they are to be written in our hearts. Daniel becomes a government official under 4 kings. You know, all these other guys, when the king comes in, they kill all of those people and put their new people in place, right? Well, Nebuchadnezzar makes him a government official after he interprets the first dream. Belshazzar, handwriting on the wall, makes him a government official. When Darius the Mede comes in, takes over the Babylonian Empire, we'll talk about here in a week or so, he keeps Daniel around, Daniel 6, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, because he had an extraordinary spirit within him. Even this guy sees it, and he knows the stories. And then when Cyrus comes, that's 4th king, he's still in power. Daniel's still in a place of notoriety in the government. The Babylonians changed his name from Daniel to Belteshazzar. The name Daniel means God has judged, but the Babylonian name of Belteshazzar, their god was Baal, B-E-L, so they named him Baal protect him, God protect him, which Daniel did not need protecting from Baal. As we know, Daniel got thrown into the lion's den. The government officials did not like Daniel. He was steady rising to power. He was making them look bad. They couldn't interpret these dreams. Daniel's knocking them out right and left. So they trying to figure out some way to get rid of Daniel. Well, they tricked Darius into making this law that you can't worship God. Like I said earlier, that's the only thing they could get on Daniel, was make up some reason that they knew he would fail, because Daniel worshiped God. So they put him in the lion's den, much to Darius' dismay. He didn't really want to do it, but he'd already made the law. So early the next morning, where's Darius? He's running right straight down to the lion's den. Daniel, has your God been able to protect you? Just like Samuel said, here I am, safe and sound. Now then, in our Bible story books, we always see the pictures of Daniel in the lion's den. I remember the one from Miss Faye Hayden's class right now. Young guy sitting there praying, long hair with the thing on his head, you know. So Daniel's probably in his 80s when they threw him in the lion's den. All right, this is way at the end. Uh-oh, somebody's going to be looking for that. Way at the end of his life. He was taken into captivity probably in his teens, maybe even earlier than that, young man. And this is at the end of the 70 years. If he was 15 years old when they took him, it's 70 years later, he's 80, you know, he's an old guy. Seemed like they could have figured out a easier way to take care of some old 85-year-old man rather than throw him to the lions, right? But that did not even work. Okay, so another interesting fact about Daniel, is that you may have heard that there are two good angels that are explicitly named in the Bible. One of them being Gabriel, one of them being Michael. Well, guess where the first time we hear about Gabriel and Michael is? The first time is that we hear about Gabriel and Michael. Daniel. Okay, Daniel meets Gabriel during one of his troubling visions. It involves a ram and a goat and some crazy horn growing out of and he didn't know. This is one of the dreams that Daniel couldn't interpret himself. Gabriel's in this dream. So Daniel asks Gabriel what it means, and he shows up to tell him that it's plans for what God has in store for Israel and all of those sorts of things. Okay, next is that we don't see any conversations between Daniel and Michael, but he's working behind the scenes. Michael is a warrior angel that combats opposing forces from Persia and Greece. Daniel chapter 10. Daniel chapter 10, 13 says, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of the Persians." 21, "However, I will tell you that inscribed in the writing of truth, yet there is no one who stands firmly against me, these forces, except Michael, your prince." So we're referring to the angel of God who is giving protection to Daniel. Okay, that brings us to the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel was taken into captivity on the second invasion of Jerusalem, which is around 596. Ezekiel apparently wasn't as good looking as Daniel, maybe. He didn't get to go on the first trip, but he certainly ended up there. Now, as we date the book of Ezekiel, as we open up the book, it tells us that he was in captivity. It came about in the 13th year on the 5th day of the 4th month, while I was by the river Chebar among the exiles. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. So Daniel was in captivity a long time before these visions started coming to him. Okay, one thing I do want to go back and look at, I forgot to bring this up, and it was kind of surprising to me. If you want to look at Psalms 137. Psalms 137. Now, we always talk about David and Solomon writing the Psalms, and they sure wrote a bunch. But they didn't write all of them. I wanted to bring this up when we were talking about Obadiah and the prophecies against Edom. Psalms 137. "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Upon the willows in the midst of it we hung our harps. For there our captors demanded of us songs, and our tormentors' mirth, saying, 'Sing one of the songs of Zion.' How can we sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget her skill." No plucking on those harps. Let me just forget how to play. "May my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom the day Jerusalem, who said, 'Raise it to its very foundation.'" That's R-A-Z-E if you're not reading along, not R-A-I-S-E. O daughter of Babylon, you devastated one, how blessed will be the one who repays you with its recompense, with what you have repaid us. This is kind of horrible, but it ends saying, how blessed will be the one who seizes and dashes your little ones against the rocks. Because that's what you did to ours. So, I wanted to bring Psalms 137 to mind. Apparently, as I was looking at who wrote, some of the commentators brought up Jeremiah. Well, Jeremiah had been to Babylon. He went to Egypt. You know, probably died down there. So either Ezekiel or who knows who wrote this psalm, but it is most definitely about the people being in captivity in Babylon. Okay, we're getting kind of close here. I don't know whether to jump into Ezekiel or not. The book of Ezekiel, I've tried to read. Whew. Boy, you can get into it a little ways, but it is a very symbolic book and difficult to understand. I have not got into any commentaries on it, but the primary thing that we see about Ezekiel is he's writing about a burden. The burden is judgment. God is going to have judgment on all of these surrounding areas, going to have judgment on Babylon. There is going to be hope for God's people. Many references to the Son of Man over 100 times. Count them, D. Oh, I'm teasing with you. 100 times in the book of Ezekiel, he's referred to as the Son of Man. Now, that's usually a term that we see in the New Testament. It is also referred to one time in the book of Daniel at the fiery furnace when there appeared to be someone, fourth character in there, and it looked like who? It looked like the Son of Man. Well, I read that a son of man refers to a son of Adam, okay? So a son of man refers to people of mankind, a man. Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. The article changes. The Son of Man kind of sets him apart of all of these other a sons of man. But anyway, that's something we'll talk a little bit more about next week when we actually get into the book of Ezekiel. I just hate to start it with 2 minutes left. So how about y'all talk for a minute? Any questions or comments about the things that we've mentioned this morning or prior to this point? Yes, sir.
The covenants were always two-sided. One God and one man. It's not just one covenant. It was a covenant between two parts had something to do with it.
And can God go bad on his part? What about that other side? We're not supposed to, but it seems like we always do. My father would always say when there was an argument or a contention between people or whatever, his line was, you know, son, a pancake's got to be mighty thin just to have one side to it. So usually there's always at least two sides. Some people say three sides, yours, mine, and then the real one, you know, the one that's actually true. All right, well, I appreciate your attention this morning. We will look into the book of Ezekiel next week, and that will be just about the last thing that we talk about until the return of the people to the land of, to Jerusalem under Cyrus the Great.